Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 40 of Logicast. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined, as always, today by my colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Middling. I have two mouses in my house now, although one of them is a mouse and the other one is a cat, and I'd rather the one that was a mouse wasn't there.
Can't you get them to play cat and mouse?
I mean, it's under the floorboards. So, I mean, given the opportunity, yes, I'm sure my cat, well, you hear it moving and the cats are just chasing it around because they can hear it and they know where it is, but they can't get to it. The upshot, however, is the mouse can't actually escape anywhere into a livable part of the house because it's come down like some boxing around the SVP from the loft, I think. So hopefully it'll just leave.
Anyway, the good news is we've made it to 40. Which is more than you've managed to do so far in life, John. I've obviously completely surpassed 40. And
yes, but we're not holding that against you.
I'm about to trigger into the next decade, but Logicast has made it to 40 episodes in Season 2. So that's quite a milestone for us. But we're not here to talk about John's rodent infestation.
It's one mouse. It's hardly an infestation.
Well, you know, it only takes another one mouse and could become lots of mice. So, yeah, we're not here to talk about John's potential rodent infestation. As regular listeners will know, Logicast is an AWS news podcast. Every week I collate a list of AWS news, which I send out in my AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I pick a subset of those news articles that we'd like to talk to you about in a little bit more detail. So we do, of course, have a selection of articles that we'd like to talk to you about this week. Very difficult to make that selection this week because, of course, it's AWS reInvent time right now. So the announcements have been coming thick and fast for the last week or two and will continue to do so as reInvent progresses. In fact, it's the keynote today on the day that we are recording this. Expect many, many more announcements to be coming out of the annual reInvent conference. But let's take a look at what we've chosen to talk about this week. So the first article is an article on the AWS news blog, and it is a new feature for CloudFront. So the article title is Introducing Amazon CloudFront KeyValueStore, a low-latency data store for CloudFront Functions. Bit of a mouthful. Fortunately, I had my teeth in, so I managed to get all of that out. But tell us a bit about this, John. What is the benefit of having a key value store for CloudFront Functions?
Just before I do that, it's worth mentioning that all 5 of the articles for today are going to be the back end of the pre-invent stuff because news cycles are funny like that. So this is one of those. You might get a bit of noise out of it in reInvent, but you know, back end of the pre-invent stuff. Right. That disclaimer out of the way. Key value stores, quick definition, they kind of are what they say on the tin. There's a few of them in AWS, and arguably every database is a key value store anyway, but the obvious ones are things like Secrets Manager, SSM Parameter Store, arguably DynamoDB. Cool. All of those live in AWS core, right? They live in the middle. They do. That's just kind of where they are. CloudFront is a bit of a funny service because it doesn't live in the middle. It lives everywhere else. It lives at all the edge locations, as they're called. And that's not necessarily a local zone, but it will have some stuff in local zones. It lives at places where you can't directly deploy things to it. You can't say, I'd like a server in this edge location, please. Because if you wanted to do that, buy a server. You know, that's kind of what that is for. Cool. Why do you want a key value store in these edge locations? Well, you're constrained to the speed of light when it comes to moving data around your networks. And yes, that is speed of light. It's not in a vacuum. It's in a bit of glass, but it's really fast. It's like 200,000 meters a second in glass, I think. It's 300,000 in a vacuum. So it's really, really quick. But it's a limit, right? You can't go any faster than that. So if you've got a CloudFront distribution, and you are serving your origin content out of London, and you have a user in Australia accessing it, and you thumbs up, and you want to that's so distracting, and you want to do something cool with the CloudFront function. Maybe you want to do URL rewriting, or you want to dynamically change an image or something like that, then your function has got to go all the way back to central core, where you've got your things hosted, to work out kind of what it needs to do, and then send the data all the way back to the user again, halfway around the world. And that's not the best experience. What this is doing is putting a key value store in those edge locations so that your CloudFront function, which is also in the edge location, doesn't have to talk back to the central core to get the data it needs. And the example that they use here is a reasonably valid one. It's URL rewriting. So this is something that's done pretty commonly. It's done in a number of different ways. It's done with a 301 and 302 redirect sometimes. Sometimes you do it with a Lambda function. Sometimes you do it on your DNS itself. There's a number of ways of doing it. But one of the things you can do is with the CloudFront function. That way it's probably the fastest because it's not going, hitting a server, hitting another server, hitting another server, and then going all the way back up the chain. It's hitting the edge location and then responding. So it's much faster. And like I say, that's kind of the example they're using here. And why do you want to do that? Well, maybe you're, again, in their example, you've gone from V1 of your blog to V2 of your blog. So you need to just change a backend URL so that you can retrieve slightly different content on the same public-facing URL. Or, again, with URL rewriting, maybe you want to be getting a different image from your local media cache, depending on where they are in the world. You want local flag.png. You want to go and get your local flag. So it's for that kind of thing. It's not groundbreaking because it's just yet another key value store, but it's handy that they've put it where they have. I do have a couple of gripes with it because nothing's perfect and it's a new service, and maybe they'll address them. The first one is you have to attach or associate, the right word, the key value store with the functions, right? So if you haven't said this function has access to this key value store, it will just bomb out and go, I can't do anything, which is really annoying because I'd like a global key value store that I can just say, well, everything can just talk to that for my one application, for argument's sake. If you've got lots of applications or lots of functions doing different things, I can see the value, but this just feels a bit odd. And the second gripe I have is, why didn't they just give me an option in one of their existing key value stores to say, push this to the edge, like edge location SSM parameter store? Because they've already got the key value store functionality. Just let me push it to somewhere else, please.
So is that something you could write a Lambda function to do? If I create a key value store here, copy it over there?
Well, you don't have access to the edge locations. That's kind of the problem, right? With SSM parameter store, you can replicate between regions. With Secrets Manager, it's a global service, so they're kind of already there anyway. But you have no direct access to control what is or isn't in an edge location beyond the couple of services that explicitly run there. CloudFront Functions, this new key value store. But like I say, what I'd like is a way of just saying, I want this to go to all of your edge locations, please.
Well, it sounds like you should use your status as an AWS community builder to push that feedback back to the product team, because although we have a huge listener base now for Logicast, we can't guarantee that the product team are going to be listening to this episode. So
I think they might be a bit busy this week, if we're honest.
Absolutely. They won't be listening to it today because they will all be at reInvent pushing their wares. Yeah, so that's why I think you should feed that all back through the formal channels. But cool. Well, thank you for that overview, John. And interesting to hear that you've got some constructive feedback for the product team. So let's make sure we get that feedback to the team via the appropriate channels. Let's move on to the next.
I must get better at doing that. I really must, because I just whinge and moan on this and then do nothing with it.
Exactly. We have channels. Use the channels. Literally channels, Slack channels. So yeah. So let's move on to the second article for today then. And this is another feature announcement, this time for CloudFormation. So the title of the article is, it's not really an article, it's more just one of their little feature announcement things, very, very short article. Well, this one's about AWS CloudFormation, simplifies resource import with a new parameter for ChangeSets. So what's this one all about, John?
This is quite handy, this is, and this is an advantage that Terraform has had over CloudFormation for a very long time. So let's, usual fashion, let's do a few definitions and then kind of bring everyone up to the same level. Right, CloudFormation, that is, I really need to stop counting on my thumb because I'm conscious it's going to thumbs up because I count on my thumb. And there we go, and it's triggered. Yeah, I should stop doing that. Right, CloudFormation is AWS's infrastructure as code service. You write either JSON or YAML, and it makes resources. Cool. When it was first around, and for a very long time, you couldn't import resources into your stacks, as they're called. It just didn't have a way of comprehending how to do that, right? If it had been created by that CloudFormation template becomes a stack, it could manage it, and if it hadn't, it couldn't. And that was kind of an end to the discussion. It was one of the key advantages for Terraform 5 years ago now, probably, was that it could do that. And it's been able to do that from, I think, day one, where you could say, through a somewhat convoluted command line command, this resource in my infrastructure code is actually that over there. You didn't make it, but I'm telling you that it exists. Please now manage it. And it would bring that into its state file, and it would understand it, and it would be able to work with it. And maybe it would want to recreate it, and you have to kind of fiddle around with it a little bit to get it to not do that, but it could do it. It's a bit faffy, but it could do it. Then CloudFormation brought on the ability to import resources. So you could create a stack from existing resources, and that was kind of handy. That was. I didn't use it a lot because we're a Terraform shop, and I kind of lean towards Terraform primarily for infrastructure work. But it was handy, and it was there, and they kind of brought it in. What they've done now is they have added a parameter to the create ChangeSet API. It's an API, but it's a command, right? When you deploy a CloudFormation template to make a stack, you run a couple of things. You can either do create stack, or you can do create ChangeSet. The ChangeSet is a way of saying this stack has X resources in it to start with, and when I apply this change, here's the delta, and it will have Y resources added to it to have Z in total. Yeah. What this is doing is you can apply this new parameter to your create change set so that you can add resources to your existing stacks rather than having to just create brand new ones from them. That's really cool as well, because that brings it much closer to feature parity with Terraform for this. Now, with Terraform, you do it on a resource by resource basis. You do, Terraform import, blah, 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 so you can identify the resource. With this one, what it's doing is it's taking the logical name of your item in your template, in your YAML or your JSON file, and using that to see if it can locate something that's got a similar sort of name, and then it'll import that, which is, it's a way of doing it, sure. And I think it's trying to do it kind of in bulk rather than giving you the option of doing one resource at a time. Because listeners that have done this with Terraform will know, if you've got to import one or two things, it's fine. If you've got to import 100, you're going to be there all day, and it's really awful. So this is a way of doing that that's a little bit different, I think. There's some caveats. So custom names aren't supported. So a number of CloudFormation resources, the way that they are deployed and named is you will call your item in your template a thing. You might call it, I don't know, user Bob, if you're making a user, for argument's sake. And then you could optionally give it a specific name. So you could then have, your logical name is Bob and your full name is Bob Smith. It doesn't support you giving it that specific name. It only works on the logical name. So it will look for something that looks like the logical name because that's how it would have named it. And that's really oddly specifically technical. If you've worked with CloudFormation, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's useful, it's helpful, it's definitely a step in the right direction. I'd love to see Terraform do that, to be really honest, where you can just say, go off and find everything that looks like roughly what I've called things and tell me about them. And on the counterpoint, I'd love to see CloudFormation be able to import single resources. So different ways of attacking the same problem, I think, but this is definitely good stuff.
Is it going to tempt people away from Terraform to use more CloudFormation, do you think?
I don't, if I'm honest. I don't think people pick one tool versus the other, weirdly, based on their functionality. And that's really a weird thing to say, and I get that. But we are, quote, at Logicata, we are a Terraform shop, and we default to using Terraform for most things. And yeah, we're building some stuff with SAR apps, and we're building some stuff with CloudFormation where it's appropriate, but generally we default to Terraform. we're not going to swap our defaults just based on the fact that you can import resources. It's like it's nice, but it's neither here nor there. And the arguments I've had historically with people for should you use CloudFormation or should you use Terraform, the Terraform one has always been, I never bought it, but it's always been, well, it's provider agnostic and it can do lots of other things other than AWS. And yes, that's true. Like we've got Terraform modules for deploying Datadog monitors, for argument's sake. That's, that's helpful. But the fact that CloudFormation doesn't do that has never been a reason to not use CloudFormation. CloudFormation, in my view, has never had a specific advantage over Terraform, aside from the fact that you never ever get rate limited with CloudFormation because it's not using the APIs. It's using kind of the backbone and doing it itself. And the state management's a bit better. But they're two tools that do the same thing, but it's like, I don't know, saying, would you use a dachshund for a livestock guardian dog just because it's very aggressive? Well, no, because it's still a tiny little sausage dog.
So are you describing CloudFormation as a sausage dog and Terraform perhaps a Rottweiler?
As a mastiff.
Analogy.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. I've been watching too much homesteading on TikTok, I think.
Yeah, interesting analogy. One more question on this one before we move on. Does it help us with Logizone?
Ooh, are we allowed to talk about that? Have we just given away a product launch?
Today, I'm excited to announce.
It might.
We can talk about it, but it's not a sales pitch. But the product sits on top of OrgFormation, which ultimately controls CloudFormation. So I was just curious if it helps.
No, it might. It might very well, because a number of the things that we implement, CloudTrail, Guard Duty, Inspector, whatever, people might already have in their accounts. So the ability to import it into something might help with that. I don't know though, because the OrgFormation wrap kind of controls a lot of how CloudFormation's called. So it may be.
Okay. Always keen to find things that we can actually use.
All right.
So could be interesting. Anyway, on that note, let's leave the sausage dog behind and skip on to our next article, which is another AWS announcement. And this one was a post on the AWS security blog about how you can use multiple instances of AWS IAM Identity Center. So IAM Identity Center, of course, is AWS's single sign-on offering. We're a huge fan of using IAM IDC within all of our customer deployments. But why might you want to use multiple instances of IAM IDC? Because I think typically in our use case, we're applying IAM IDC at the org level, and we just use that identity center for all authentication across the organization. So curious as to why you might want to use multiple instances of IAM IDC.
So primarily it's intended to support, it says this in the article, so I'm going to read it verbatim more or less, sandbox deployments of AWS managed applications such as Code Catalyst, which are only usable within the account and region that they were created in. Right. So Code Catalyst is the thing that I got wrong the other day when we had Johannes on, and I got told off for being wrong about it because I mixed it up with Application Composer. But it's, I think, GitHub, but within AWS, and you're not far off. It's got a Kanban, it does source control, it's got workflows and kind of all the rest of it. And they integrated it with IAM IDC. Brilliant. I don't want to give people access to my entire IAM IDC organization just so that they can log into the dev account and do some dev work, And historically, how you got around that was IAM users. But IAM users are kind of on the outs now because of IAM IDC and just general best practices around long-lived credentials and what have you. So this, I think, goes a way to address some of those issues. And I think it will end up being integrated in more and more things that are AWS, but don't live in the AWS console, like Amplify, like Data Zone, like Code Catalyst. They don't live in the console, they live like near the console. So this, I think, will go some way to addressing the issues with authenticating for those things, where they've had like their own user auth and it's all been a bit messy. So that's it, in short version. And the other thing is, you can use it to provision users directly against accounts so that they can have access specifically to that account and not the whole org. And yes, again, you can kind of do that with IAM IDC at the org level because you can put them in a group and that group can have access to just that one account. So the dev group can have access only to the dev account and the dev role in the dev account. But it's almost like, again, I'm going to use a really weird analogy here, trying to kill a fly using a bazooka. It's yes, the fly's going to die, but you're going to knock your house down. It's too much. And yes, that's a reference from the third Terminator film, which is awful, but it's very quotable. So it's that, realistically. It's a way of just being a bit more specific about where you're putting users into specific accounts. And they do talk about a few specific options, and it's, trials for managed applications to work out if it supports your specific needs, which is great. Or maybe you can't deploy IAM IDC across your whole organization for one reason or another, but you want to experiment with the aforementioned managed applications. Or you need to like I've just explained, have like a subset of users, and you don't want them in the main account, if that makes sense. It does go on to talk about the fact that you can have users in both of them, and they could be the same, and they could be duplicates, and that's a problem. And then they kind of give you a load of code to work out when that's a problem. The fact that they've thought about it and given you some I don't know if it's a Lambda or if it's, I did look at this a minute ago. Oh, cool. Where is it? Yeah, it's basically a Python script. So you could run it as a Lambda, or you could run it from your local or whatever. The fact that they've given you some code to work it out means that they've at least thought about it, but they didn't build it into the product offering to prevent you from doing that. And maybe that's by design, such that your org level IDC instance has no knowledge or visibility of your account level IDC instances, and more specifically the other way round, so that an account level instance can't do anything to the org level instance, perhaps. So, I mean, it's giveth with one hand and taketh away with the other. It's, I'm able to do all of these nice new cool things, but I've now got all these other caveats I need to worry about. So it's like, hey, I'm not sure on this one. And again, they go some way to addressing that by basically saying, if you created your IAM IDC instance before effectively the date of that announcement, which was about a week ago now, then it's not turned on, and you have to explicitly turn on account level instances. Or if it's created after this functionality was available, here is a service control policy that you can apply at the org level to prevent anyone from creating account level IDC instances. Problem solved. And in terms of your previous question, yes, I will be implementing that. Cool. Because just turn this off. For our specific use case, unless we get I want to play with Code Catalyst, please let me do that through this login method. There's no point in existing. It's just a risk that we don't need.
I have another question for you, slightly off topic, but are you no longer using your Logitech MX Master 3 with silent scrolling wheel? Oh, because I could hear a ratchety scrolling noise when you.
It's not the Master. It's not the Master 3. It's the MX Master V1 Amazon Special Edition, because I'm cheap, and it was like £45 special offer because they were getting rid of it. It does have a silent scrolling wheel, so I can scroll with no noise.
Yeah, but you like the noise.
Well, what I like is a little bit of a ratchet, and then I kind of go on it aggressively to get to the bottom of a long page, and it freewheels.
Well, we digress completely from cloud into mice, but we were talking about mice earlier on in the episode, so we just seem to be getting drawn back to mice. Anyway, let's move swiftly on.
Which is actually what Dachshunds were bred to kill, believe it or not, was mice.
Oh, there we go. It's the
whole
conversation is about mice, yeah. But let's zoom out a little bit from mice and cloud tech into the world of data center tech. So our next article, while still about AWS, is more at the actual data center level rather than at the console and service level. And this one is an article on datacenterdynamics.com about how AWS is using reclaimed wastewater for data center cooling at 20 of its locations in the US. So occasionally we like to talk about data center tech because we're geeks and we find it cool. But this one is all about how they're using reclaimed wastewater rather than drinking water to cool the data centers. So I had a good read of this one, and I've got some questions about it as well. But what are your thoughts on this one, John?
It's interesting. It is very interesting, and I agree with the premise. Let's start there. Potable water, drinking water, it's not a finite resource as such, because you could always just retreat stuff and boil it and filter it and all the rest of it. But it is a resource that's not infinitely available 100% of the time. So if we can reduce our usage of potable water, and I'm going to keep saying potable because I like the word. If we can reduce our usage of potable water for things that don't need it to be safe for consumption, then that's great. This is brilliant. And this also very obviously ties in with AWS's previous announcements that we spoke about them being water positive by, I forget when, 2030, 2035, something like that.
2030, yeah.
Yeah, so it definitely ties into that as well, because if you are, rather than taking water out of the system, and then putting water that's not safe for human consumption back in the system, that's obviously not going to help. If you're taking water out of a different system that's already not safe for human consumption, it's much more of a, what do they call it, a circular economy, particularly in this case. It's not an economy, but it's like it's a closed loop. That's the word I'm looking for. So that you're taking non-drinking water, non-potable water, using it for something that it doesn't need to be safe for consumption anyway, sending it back to be treated again so that you can then use it again for your non-human consumption purposes. So this is great. I've got no concerns with this at all. It's like I say, I've got no concerns with this at all. It talks about bacteria and limescale and chemical treatments and kind of all the rest of it. Because yes, I certainly wouldn't want to drink the water that's been cooling a CPU personally. It's going to be full of copper, amongst other things. But I don't think it would work in the south of England, where our water is so hard it's basically a solid.
Yes, limescale problems. But one question I had about this, I mean, obviously it's very good for the whole water positive agenda, but the article does mention that the water needs to be treated several times before it can be used. So, and I don't necessarily expect you to be able to answer this, but it was just a question that sprang into my mind when I was reading the article. What does that do for the carbon neutral agenda if you're having to treat the water several times before you can use it for cooling? Are we just kind of taking one problem and converting it into a different problem? Because it's not like the wastewater is used in its pure form of wastewater. It has to be treated before it can be used for cooling. Perhaps not treated as much as if we were going to try and use it as potable water again. But how much energy does that treatment process use?
Well, I think the wastewater would be treated anyway, so I think it's negligible different. To be really honest, I think it's negligible. Because it really depends on what the plant-based treatment method actually means. Because if they're taking foul water from houses that's got, I don't want to lower the tone, but all sorts of things that you might put down your toilet, then you're not going to use that to cool your servers down, are you? Let's be real here. People eat curry occasionally. If it's surface water runoff, because in the UK that is treated differently. Certainly in the sewerage systems, you have what's called grey water, which is like your surface runoff, and black water, and that's just what it's called, and that's contaminated water that's got waste in it. And they treat them differently. They don't go to the same places, they don't get the same level of treatment, because rain is clean, generally speaking. Your gutter isn't, but the rain is pretty clean. So surface water runoff is treated differently. So it depends what they mean by waste, I think, in this case. But but I think net it's pretty negligible.
Cool. Okay. Conscious of time, and we've got one more article to get through in this episode. So this last article this week is an article on Forbes from Jana Kiram, MSV, who is quite a well-known analyst in the space, and he has made 5 generative AI predictions for reInvent 2023. So I guess we can just quickly skip through each of his predictions. The first one is that AWS users will get an official AI assistant for cloud operations. So basically, this sounds like Auto John. It sounds like next year I might not need you, John. I can just ask an AI assistant to do what you do.
Kind of. So, like I said at the caveat at the start, this is all kind of pre-invent stuff. Hence, that's happened. That exists. That's happened. You might recall I was jumping up and down about the fact that AWS bought Fig a little while ago. They've integrated Code Whisperer with Fig and the CLI such that you can run, I forget the specific term, but you can run a command and then tell it in long form what you'd like to do. Like, I'd like to copy files from this directory into that S3 bucket. And it will tell you the command you need to run to do that. So that happened.
But I think he's talking about it going a step further, and rather than telling you the command you need to run, is actually running it.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah. Okay. Second one was a new category of managed database services based on vector databases. I know nothing about vector databases. That's a new term on me. Do you know anything about vector databases, John?
Yeah, a little bit. I know about graph databases, and they have vectors as part of it, right? So a vector in a graph is you have nodes and relationships, and the relationship is the vector. Vector is a relationship. It's how one node connects to another one. So it's just a way of giving, as he says, providing LLMs with, quote, long-term memory, quote, so that they can remember the history of conversations and the relationships between various data points, and give contextual inputs to avoid what they call hallucinations, which again is brilliant. It's brilliant that AIs hallucinate, which is when they make stuff up.
Without any hallucinogenics.
Disappointing.
So the third prediction was serverless RAG pipelines connecting various AWS data services to LLMs. Lots of TLAs. This was a new one on me. Retrieval augmented generation. What might be the use case here?
This is not really my area, to be honest. It's a way of getting data out of things like LLMs a lot easier, a lot faster. It's retrieval augmented, right? I think this has happened. I think this has been I think this was announced, or I've certainly seen some noise about this.
Yeah.
I think it was in the step function space as well, which that makes sense. It sort of fits.
I think the next one has happened as well, although maybe they've not announced it. So the fourth prediction was a new and more improved large language model than Titan. So Titan, of course, is AWS's own LLM, and his prediction was that there would be a new and improved AWS LLM. So actually, no, I think I might be confusing this with some other announcements that there were some other third-party LLMs that had recently been integrated into Bedrock. So I guess this is slightly different, and perhaps AWS are keeping that announcement back. Or have you seen something around this already?
No, I haven't, but it would make sense, right? Because when they announced Bedrock and they started talking about Titan, the GPT models it was 3 and 3.5. GPT-4 has come along, and it's leaps and bounds better than previous ones. So Titan was kind of designed to compete with something that's been superseded, so they need to come out with something new.
Yeah. I guess what AWS are hoping is they can take the lead in the AI arms race, as it were, against Microsoft and
yeah, because they're definitely on the back foot with it. They're definitely on the back foot with it, which is rare for them.
And then the last of these predictions was multimodal AI in Amazon Bedrock. So what's multimodal AI?
So currently, if you talk to something like the older version of ChatGPT, you get GPT-3, 3.5, and all that can do, it's an LLM, and it can talk to you, and you can talk back, and you can have a conversation, and it can give you some results. GPT-4, I think, will also say you can talk to it, and it will give you back either conversation, or it can generate images using a different model. Because an LLM is a large language model, it's not capable of producing images. You do something like, I think, Stable Diffusion for that to produce some images. And I've certainly seen some conversations that people have been having with GPT-4 where they kind of have this back and forth, and they say, give me an image that looks like this. And then they give more context and more context. You end up with these ridiculous images of like hell spawn cats and that kind of thing, where they've just gone, make it angrier. So it's a way of having multiple models in the same interface, as opposed to you having to hook that all together yourself.
I guess that's then similar to the Party Rock application that last week's guest produced. I don't know if you saw that, his multi-language translation tool. I might be confusing it with something else, actually, but I did see one of the Party Rock apps, which was bringing back text-based results and image-based results. So I guess pulling those from different models, hence multimodal AI. So again, something that's kind of happening already, but perhaps will be made more of at reInvent. So that brings us to the end of our time for season 2, episode 40 of Logicast. reInvent is on as we're recording this, so there's going to be a lot more announcements, and we'll be back next week with a reInvent special. John and I are obviously sadly not at reInvent, but we will be having a guest on the podcast who is at reInvent, who's going to come back and tell us about his experiences at reInvent and perhaps pick on some of the more significant announcements. So stay tuned to our next episode for that. But in the meantime,
that our next one or the one after?
I don't know, but it will be a future episode. So
soon. It's soon. Listen to next week and just keep listening.
I think we're recording 2 episodes next week, so
yes.
But we will be having a reInvent special where we'll be covering off some of the bigger announcements from reInvent with a guest who is currently at reInvent. So stay tuned for those future episodes. Thank you again for listening. Don't forget to, if you like the podcast, share it with anyone who you think may be interested. You can, of course,
or not. If they're not interested, give it to them anyway.
Share it with them anyway, exactly. And you or they can download the podcast from anywhere you normally get your podcasts, or of course view it on YouTube. So thanks for listening. That was season 2, episode 40 of Logicast. We'll see you again next time. Cheers.